The divorce papers were handed to Sarah Whitfield in the middle of her own dinner party. Not in a lawyer's office, not in their bedroom after a quiet conversation that had been a long time coming. Right there, at the table she had set herself. The white linen, the good china, the candles she had driven 40 minutes to find because Dex said he liked the way beeswax burned, with his mother sitting at the far end of the table looking at her manicured nails, and the woman he had been seeing for 8 months sitting close enough to Dex that their chairs were almost touching. Sarah Whitfield was 37 years old. She had been married to Dexton Aldridge for 6 years. She had never once raised her voice at him. She did not raise it then either. She took the envelope, looked at it for a moment, the kind of moment that felt longer than it was, the kind that people would later describe differently depending on which side of the table they had been sitting on. And then she set it next to her water glass and finished the bite of food that was already in her mouth. That was the part Dex's mother, Roberta Aldridge, 61 years old, and the woman who had quietly orchestrated most of what was about to happen, did not expect. She had expected tears, she had hoped for begging, she got neither. What people in Dex's family knew about Sarah was this: she was quiet, she was polite, she made good food, and she had never quite fit. Roberta had decided that within the first year of the marriage, not because Sarah was unkind, she wasn't, not because she wasn't smart, she clearly was, but because Sarah had a life that existed before Dex, and she never pretended otherwise, and Roberta found that threatening in a way she never fully put into words. What Roberta did not know about Sarah, what almost no one knew, was that before the wedding, before she had even said yes to Dex's proposal at that restaurant in Charleston, where the bread was too expensive and the service was slow, Sarah had already spent 8 years building something. She had started it at 23 out of a spare bedroom in a rental apartment with a graphic design contract and a client who paid late and a second client who didn't pay at all. By 26, she had 4 employees. By 29, she had 14, a proper office on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Raleigh, and a reputation up to mid-sized commercial real estate branding that was quiet but very solid. The company was called Whitfield Studio. She had kept her name on it intentionally. When she married Dex, she moved the company's legal structure into a trust that had been drawn up by her attorney 6 months before the wedding. Her name was in it. Dex's was not. It wasn't a statement. It was just the kind of thing you did when you'd built something from nothing, and you understood, even at 31 and in love. That love and business were 2 separate documents. She never hid this from Dex. She told him about it the way you'd mention a dental appointment, plainly, without drama, because it wasn't dramatic. He said he understood. He said he was proud of her. He said a lot of things in those first years. The Aldridge family ran a chain of mid-scale event venues in the Carolinas. 4 locations, been in the family since Dex's grandfather had opened the first one in 1971. They did corporate parties, retirement dinners, weddings, the kind of events that needed a big room, a catering service, and someone to manage the timeline. For a long time they had done well enough, but well enough had been shrinking for about 4 years by the time Sarah and Dex got married, and it had been shrinking faster in the last 2. The venues were aging. The branding was stuck in 2003. They had lost 2 major corporate contracts to newer spaces that had better photography, cleaner websites, and a presence on platforms that Aldridge Event Group didn't fully understand. Dex knew this. He talked about it constantly at dinner in the early years of the marriage. How his mother wouldn't modernize, how his Uncle Clement kept saying they just needed to ride it out, how no one in the family wanted to spend what it would take to fix the thing properly. Sarah listened. She always listened. Once, in the 2nd year of their marriage, she had offered to have her team do a full brand audit. Just look at it. No commitment. Dex had brought it up to Roberta, who had smiled the way she smiled when she was dismissing something, and said that they preferred to keep family business in the family. Sarah was family, Dex had pointed out. Roberta had smiled again and changed the subject. Sarah didn't offer again. The woman at the dinner table, the one sitting close enough to Dex that their chairs were almost touching, was named Lorene Voss. She was 34, worked in corporate hospitality, and had been introduced to Dex by Roberta at a venue industry conference in Charlotte 14 months ago. Sarah had met Lorene twice before that dinner. Both times, Roberta had been present. Both times, the conversation had found a way to circle back to Aldridge Event Group's legacy, its values, its deep roots in the community, the kind of language that sounded like praise but was actually a measuring stick. Sarah had understood the subtext both times. She hadn't said anything about it. She had, however, started paying closer attention. The dinner where Dex handed her the papers had been framed as a family gathering. That was the word Dex used when he called her that Thursday afternoon, gathering. He said his mother wanted to do something nice. He said it casually, The way you say things when you've been rehearsing them. Sarah made roasted chicken and a salad with that vinaigrette Roberta had once said she liked, and she set the table and lit the candles. And she told herself she was probably reading too much into things. Roberta arrived first with Dex's Uncle Clement, 64 years old, and a man who had never once looked Sarah directly in the eye for more than a second. Then Dex came in from the garage, the house they shared, with Lorraine beside him, and he said, in the same rehearsed casual tone, that he hoped Sarah didn't mind, that Lorraine had just happened to be nearby. Sarah said of course not. She got another plate from the cabinet. They sat down. They ate. The conversation stayed on the surface the whole way through. The venues, a wedding they'd hosted last weekend, whether the weather was going to be good in October. Sarah answered when spoken to. She poured the wine. She passed the bread. Then Dex reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and put the envelope on the table in front of her plate. He didn't look at her when he did it. He looked at the table. Roberta looked at her nails. Lorraine looked at Dex. Sarah looked at the envelope for exactly as long as she needed to understand what it was, and then she picked it up and opened it and read the first 2 pages while the table was completely silent. Then she set it down next to her water glass, picked up her fork, and finished her dinner. "Okay," she said when she was done eating. That was all she said. Dex had clearly prepared for more, because he had a whole speech started before she said it, and when she said only that one word, the speech fell apart in the middle, and he had to find somewhere else to put it. He said something about it being a long time coming. He said something about them both, knowing things hadn't been right for a while. Roberta made a small sound of agreement at the end of the table. Sarah carried her plate to the kitchen, wrapped the leftover chicken, and put it in the refrigerator. She did not cry until she was in her car, parked in the driveway of her own house, at 11:40 at night after everyone had gone. And even then it was brief. The kind of crying that isn't really about sadness yet, just about shock catching up to the body. She sat in the car for 22 minutes. Then she went inside, washed her face, and called her attorney. Sarah's attorney was a woman named Claudette Ferris, 52 years old, who had handled the trust structure years before, and who, when she heard what had happened, said very little for a moment and then said, "All right, let's talk." They talked for 2 hours that night. What Claudette confirmed was what Sarah already knew in the general shape of things. The trust was solid, the company was protected, and there was something else worth discussing. Aldridge Event Group had been shopping for a branding and redesign partner for the past 6 months. Sarah had not known the specifics of this until recently, but she had known it was coming. The signs had been there, and she had spent enough time around the family to understand the trajectory. The venues were in a bad enough position that they had finally agreed to bring in outside help. The firm they had landed on, the one Clement had apparently championed in a family meeting 3 weeks ago, the one they were preparing to sign a contract with, was a boutique branding and creative studio based in Raleigh. Its name was Whitfield Studio. They had found it through an industry referral. They had gone through 2 rounds of proposals. They had liked the work, liked the team, liked the pricing. No one in the Aldridge family had made the connection, because no one in the Aldridge family had ever paid enough attention to Sarah for a living to know what her company was called. Roberta had been in the room for the final proposal presentation. She had said she liked their approach. The next 8 weeks were the quietest of Sarah's adult life. She signed the divorce papers and returned them through her attorney without any additional communication. She moved her personal things out of the house on a Tuesday, when Dex was at one of the venues, with the help of 2 friends and a rented truck. She did not take anything that wasn't hers. She did not leave anything behind by accident. She kept going to work. She ran her team's morning check-ins the same way she always had. She approved the design revisions on a hotel account they were finishing. She went over the proposal one more time for the Aldridge project, not because it needed revision, but because she wanted to make sure everything was exactly right. Her team knew she was going through something. She didn't tell them what. They didn't ask directly. They brought her coffee and moved the morning meetings to the smaller conference room, where the chairs were better, and that was how they showed her they knew. She appreciated that more than she would have been able to say at the time. The contract signing with Aldridge Event Group was scheduled for a Wednesday morning at their main office, a converted warehouse space off I-40 that Dex's grandfather had renovated in 1988, and that still smelled faintly of the same carpet cleaner they'd apparently been using since then. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock. Sarah arrived at 9:55. She wore a grey blazer she'd had for 3 years and liked because it fit exactly right, and she carried the project folder and her laptop and a coffee she'd picked up on the way. Her creative director, a 30-year-old named Whitmore Pell, who was exceptionally good at reading rooms, walked in beside her. The Aldridge side of the table was already seated when they came in. Clement was there. Two other people from the family's operations side, whose names Sarah had seen on emails but never met in person. A young woman there to take notes, and Dex sitting at the far end of the table, looking down at the folder in front of him. And Roberta sitting to Clement's right, looking at the door. The moment Roberta saw Sarah walk through it, her expression did something specific. A kind of layered reset that moved through surprise and then confusion and then something harder to name. She looked at Clement. Clement looked at the table. Dex looked up from his folder and went very still. Sarah set her laptop on the table, smiled at the room the way she would smile at any client meeting, and said, "Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Whitfield. I'm the founder and creative director of Whitfield Studio. This is Whitmore, our lead on your project." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Clement said carefully, "We weren't aware that. We didn't realize that you were the I know," Sarah said pleasantly. "Should we get started?" Roberta's voice came from the far end of the table, low and with an edge in it. "What is this?" Sarah looked at her. "It's the kickoff meeting for your rebrand," she said. "We're scheduled for 10 o'clock. We're right on time." "You didn't disclose this," Roberta said. The edge had gotten sharper. "When you submitted the proposal, you didn't say. The proposal was submitted by Whitfield Studio," Sarah said. "The name of the firm is on every document you've signed. The contact information, the contract header, the invoice structure, all of it says Whitfield Studio." She paused. "I'm Sarah Whitfield. The studio is named for me." Roberta stood up. The young woman with the notepad stopped writing. "I want you to understand," Roberta said, and her voice had gotten very quiet in the way that voices sometimes do when someone is trying to hold themselves together, "that I will not sit in a meeting with you. I will not do business with you. This family will not do business with you." Sarah let the statement finish. Then she opened her project folder. "That's certainly your right," she said. "But I'd recommend reviewing the contract before making that decision. There's a cancellation clause on page 11. If the project is terminated within 30 days of contract execution for reasons that don't constitute a material breach, the client owes 30% of the full project fee." She turned to a marked page and slid the document toward the center of the table. "Your project fee was structured at $62,000. 30% of that is $18,600, due within 14 days of cancellation." Clement picked up the document. Dex had not said a word since she walked in. He was looking at the table. "Additionally," Sarah continued, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been since she walked through the door, steady and professional and not raised even slightly, "you're currently 6 months into a 3-year agreement with your venue software platform, which we discussed in the discovery phase. Pulling out of this rebrand now without a replacement strategy would leave that investment without the corresponding marketing infrastructure to justify it. I want you to go into this decision with the full picture." Roberta sat back down, not because she wanted to, because Clement had reached over and touched her arm very gently and given her the look that said, "Stop." There was a long silence. Then Clement said, "Can you give us a moment?" "Of course," Sarah said. She closed her folder, picked up her coffee, and walked with Whitmore to the small seating area near the entrance. She sat down in one of the chairs and looked at her phone for 6 minutes, while the Aldridge family had a conversation at the other end of the room that she could not hear but did not need to. When Clement came back over, he looked older than he had when she'd walked in. "We'd like to proceed with the meeting," he said. Sarah nodded and stood up. "Great," she said. "Let's talk about your venues." She did not enjoy it the way people might assume she did. That was the thing about that morning that she would try to explain later. To her friends, to Claudette, to herself, that she hadn't gone into that room looking for a moment, she had gone in to do a job. The satisfaction, when it came, was quieter than revenge. It was closer to clarity. She knew what she was worth. She had always known. The difference was that now the people in that room knew it too, and there wasn't anything left to pretend otherwise. The project ran for 5 months. Sarah's team was professional and thorough and delivered exactly what they had promised. 2 of the Aldridge venues had their best booking quarter in 4 years after the rebrand launched. The third opened a new corporate partnership that Clement said, in a brief handwritten note he sent with the final payment, had been partly driven by the new presentation materials. Dex was not present at the final delivery meeting. He had stepped back from the day-to-day operations by then, whether by choice or at Roberta's suggestion. Sarah didn't know and didn't ask. Roberta was not present either. It was just Clement and the operations team and Sarah's people going through the last deliverables the way any professional handoff goes, methodically, item by item, making sure everything was accounted for. When it was done, Clement shook Sarah's hand and said, "Your team did good work." "They always do," Sarah said. And she meant it. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in November, 2 days before Thanksgiving. Sarah found out via a text from Claudette and spent the rest of that afternoon finishing a proposal for a new client, a boutique hotel group in Asheville that had found them through an industry feature in a trade magazine. The article had mentioned Whitfield Studios' work on a multi-location rebranding project. It had called the results remarkable. It had not named the client. It didn't need to. That evening, Sarah went home, her own home now, a place she had rented, while she looked for something permanent with big windows and a kitchen that got good light in the mornings. And she made herself dinner, something simple, and she sat at the table by herself and ate it. Her phone had a few messages she hadn't answered yet. Her creative director asking about a timeline, a friend checking in, a reminder about a dentist appointment. She answered the messages, added the dentist appointment to her calendar, and poured herself a second glass of wine. Outside the window, the November dark had come down completely. The street was quiet. She could hear faintly the sound of a neighbor's dog and somewhere further off the sound of traffic on the main road. She had built something from nothing twice. Once before anyone was watching, and once in front of people who had counted on her failing. She had not failed. She sat with that for a while. Not triumphantly, not sadly, just honestly. And then she cleared her plate, washed her glass and went to bed. In the morning, there was work to do.